So many similarities between what's happening in Scotland and what's happened in other places, including here in Dublin in 2016 and I suppose in the Netherlands before that. And interestingly, this feud seems to be being directed from prison and again from Dubai. So at the heart of it is this 20-year feud between what's known as the Daniel and Lyons crime families. Goes back to 2001 when there was some missing drugs and there was accusations that one had stolen from the other. And in December 2006, there's this shooting at a garage in Lamb Hill, which is north of Glasgow. And at that point, two men, Raymond Anderson and James MacDonald, who were working for the Daniels side, arrived at the garage, put masks on and shot the owner, David Lyons, the head then of the Lyons crew, jumped for safety. His nephew, Michael, was shot dead. And his other nephew, Stephen Lyons, a significant character today, and his associate, Robert Pickett, were both shot and injured. So that was kind of their... I suppose that the 2006 was a bit of a Regency moment, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a feud that has been just as bloody as the Hutch-Kinahan feud. There've been so many shootings and bombings that haven't resulted in fatalities, but it's been it caused absolute chaos on the streets of Scotland. Certainly, the Daniel crime family had been probably the preeminent gang in Scotland at one stage. They had formed really on the back of the heroin boom and had risen to being probably the most powerful gang. But the Lyons crew were a group of younger people, and they seem to have made a move in them. Ultimately, that shooting would see Stephen Lyons would flee Scotland at that time, and he went over to Spain. And really, it's in Spain that he made those connections that allowed him to be pushed into a bigger league, and I suppose for the Lyons gang to come out largely on top in that feud.
Connections, of course, with the Kinahan organisation, the Irish mafia out there at the time. Now, I suppose the Daniels family were stronger at one point. They were headed up by Jamie Daniels. And,
I think Jamie Daniels was regarded as being a classic sort of old school gangster.
Yeah.
He'd been, very quiet, very unshowy. He had an enforcer, a guy called Kevin Gerbil Carroll, who was...
He was the powerhouse really behind it because he seemed to be absolutely terrorise everybody that came near him.
Yeah, and he was, literally the most feared man in Scotland. He had married into the Daniel family, so he had that connection. But he... What he was doing was a lot of, if there was deaths or if there was people perceived to get in on their patch, he would kidnap and torture them. One of those psychopathic guys in gangland.
Yeah.
But eventually he was taken out, and that seemed to have swung the balance in favour of the Lyons. But I
sort of seemed to have gone out of control. He at one point pulled down a headstone belonging to I think Eddie Senior's son, Gary, who had died of cancer as a young child. And he'd gone up to the graveyard and pulled down the headstone. And then around 2009, the year before he died, he had been sort of doing these things they called alien abductions, where he was kind of abducting rival gang members and associates of the Lyons. And he was sort of torturing them, I mean, horrendously with a crew, leaving them go then to show their injuries in a way that he was becoming ever more feared. He was taken out. It was interesting, actually. I've been listening to Gangster, the BBC Sounds podcast series, and they've recently taken up the story of the Daniels and the Lyons clan fights. Interestingly, this was released just before Christmas. It's all kicked off again, which is why we're talking about it. But so they talk about Carol's murder, which was in a shopping centre car park, and he's with two guys and he's in the back of one of these cars. I was just listening to it this morning there, that only have two doors in them, three doors, whatever, with the boot. So he's had to kind of climb in the back and the seats have closed down on top of him. He's very trapped.
Yeah.
A very unusual kind of place for a guy under threat of death to feel comfortable sitting in. And of course, the two guys in the car flee just before he comes under fire. He's seems to be a suggestion during trials later on that the doors of the car were actually locked, although I think one of those accused said that they just had the button in the
Yeah.
hand and it went off.
Look, it all, yeah, you can hear it and hear why people would be suspicious of how it went down. But it certainly was a blow, I think, to the Daniels organisation. And then obviously the patriarch of the family ultimately would pass away.
He died in 2016.
And when he passed, there was a lot of his younger associates. You see, it was very much a patriarchal criminal organisation that was really managed by this one man. And in the aftermath, it seems to have, become far more chaotic. A lot of the younger members of the gang had drug problems, were certainly capable of dangerous and sinister criminal acts, but they didn't have that organisation, where the Lyons organisation really got folded into the Kinahan cartel. I mean, Stephen Lyons was, not just somebody that we could say has a loose association with Daniel Kinahan, but was really, really quite far up in his inner circle.
You see, funny enough, what they do in 2016, it is very, again, the MO of what we've seen of what's now that European super cartel. So the Lyons group see weakness. Daniel has died. Jamie Daniel has died of cancer in 2016. His chief enforcer, Carol, has never been really replaced because there isn't that many psychopaths out there. They're finite in their numbers. So they kind of move in at a time of weakness and they go for them.
Yeah.
And there's 5 attempted murders in a row, including, certainly Stephen Bonzo Daniel was given this Glasgow smile. I mean, in a horrific circumstances. He was in a car and he was attacked. The surgeon didn't believe he was going to be survived. The Glasgow smile, of course, is this cuts from ear to mouth. And they talk about using blades with coins between them so as you're actually able to
so you're not able to sew it up effectively because there's 2 cuts so close together. I mean, it's a particularly barbaric tradition, I suppose.
So that's all been going on. There's been a number of different shootings outside schools, which are horrendous. Again, they kind of, within that world, they make sense because it's those under threat. It's their routine. They go and drop their kids at school. Of course, there's attempted shootings at schools, and you have children there caught in the crossfire, primary school kids terrorised, no doubt, by the gunshots and all the rest of it. And on this has gone. But as I said, it seems to have kicked off again. And again, I suppose any sort of peace is always very, it's likely to, I mean, there's deep-seated hatreds there between those two gangs. The current situation, you have a guy called Mark Richardson, aligned to the Daniels organisation, who is in prison. He's serving a 10-year sentence. And he is sort of seen, really, is he now, as the head of the Daniels family, or certainly...
Yeah, I mean, I think he was convicted in 2018, and at that point while like those criminal organisations are fluid, and obviously we're not over there on the ground, but he seems to have mopped up that kind of organisation. The younger members of the Daniels clan weren't capable of keeping that going, but those old associations are certainly there. It's
and he's a powerful figure. I mean, he's been described as hugely organised. So he has really taken sort of management, CEO of this kind of grouping.
Yeah.
And he's been described in court as being very sophisticated, having a really sophisticated money laundering wing, etc. So he is kind of something to be reckoned with for the Lyons.
Yes, and there's various associations there. I mean, we even did a podcast at the time about James the Iceman Stevenson. So there is, even though they're not directly...
Where does he sit again?
Well, he sits, I think, he was one of the people who was being linked to Richardson as a supplier. Yeah. So while they're not directly involved in the feud, and Mark Richardson, he's an Edinburgh-based criminal as opposed to Glasgow. So they certainly, like in Ireland, you have these alliances. Some of them are looser and stronger.
Yeah.
But what seems to have happened is, actually, I listened to Gangster at the end of last year when it first came out, and it was kind of ends on the note of, not that this is all over, but that
it's sort of tenuous peace.
Yeah, or it's kind of died down, and a lot of the main players in the Lyons organisation are effectively in Dubai. But Mark Richardson, there has what basically seems to have happened, and again, none of this has been reported to the police, but there seems to have been 500,000 pounds. I'm able to say pounds now on this occasion. Pounds worth of cocaine in a safe house, and something has gone wrong. There's different reports. One of the reports are that masked men break in and rob it. Another one is that they buy it using counterfeit notes. But there's this big dispute goes on over this 500,000 pounds worth of cocaine, which is a big seizure. And this seems to have kicked off a series of tit-for-tat incidents that is really, really dangerous. There's been a lot of it has been like we see in Ireland as these feuds begin to start up. It sort of starts off with these fire bombings, and they've gone on again and again. There was I think a beauty salon that was linked to Mark Richardson set on fire. There's been a number of attempted shootings, non-fatal at this stage. The Lyons clan are obviously blaming the Richardsons over this seizure, and there was even talk that Stephen Lyons has brought in people, his own gang, to discuss this seizure, and has made them take lie detector tests to see if somebody had set it up. And yeah, it's
and
really.
We have a Mr. Big in Dubai who is a younger member of the Lions crew who isn't named for legal reasons, and he seems to be calling the shots and has hired a grouping who are not only firebombing the properties related to Richardson and the Daniels crew and attacking, relatives and all the rest of it, but they're videoing these attacks. And it's a kind of a concerted propaganda effort to sort of almost a news channel. They're calling them a group called the Tama Junta.
Yeah. I mean, where that name comes from, I can safely say I have no idea. But yeah, again, like it's how these feuds are fought. They're also fought on a propaganda level. Mark Richardson is in prison. He's serving a lengthy prison sentence, and it's an attempt to intimidate people into silence. And it goes on. We saw it in Drogheda ourselves, in particular, where those arson attacks were going on. All sorts of things are being put up on social media. What you see is that Dubai, again, always comes back into it. There have been reports in the Scottish papers talking about Ridwan Taji's associates linking up with this Mr. Big over in Dubai. Like the Lions organisation, incredible stuff has gone on. Those links to Holland are really well established. There was the murder of a crime reporter called Martin Koch, a former criminal who became a crime blogger, sort of a tradition in the Netherlands that probably we don't have here. He was ultimately assassinated, and that assassination was certainly meant to have been directed by Ridwan Taji. But even at that point, we heard Scottish criminals were involved, and that association, and of course, that all comes through Daniel Kinahan.
And if you remember back in 2016, amongst everything else that was happening, so we have obviously Jamie Daniels dying, and that sort of, the Lions seeing an opportunity to move in and try and finish off some of those. But at the time, from here, when we were busy enough with what was going on in this country, we were seeing the criminal Paul Rice, who was linked at one point to the Kinahan organisation, who's gone very quiet recently. He was going to Scotland, to Glasgow. He was going out there to sort of represent, I think, the Kinahan organisation at the time.
Yeah,
and a kind of a muscle as heavy as showing the links between the Lions and the Kinahans. He was a face on the ground as such when no one else could travel. Interestingly, as well, there's mention of brothers called James and Barry Gillespie, who seem to have been significant criminals in Scotland as well. Now they are feared dead in Brazil. They were living out there, and there's a void left.
Yeah.
Again, it's another classic. There is sort of movement within the market. There's and the Mr. Big in Scotland is really moving in. He wants to take over that piece of turf, that bit of the market. So all those elements are there really that you see in other places, and you see these feuds break out. And unfortunately, they can, a lot of these feuds, when there's firepower, when there's money, and when there's that kind of level of historical animosity between two factions, you see regularly, certainly the feuds we can lean on to look at, you see murders when they start, you're talking about double figures before the feud kind of abates.
100%. I mean, if you look, we talk about that I think it was £50,000 worth of cocaine that went missing back in 2001 that sparked all of this. There'd be people involved in this feud now carrying out possibly some of those arson and attacks and shootings that weren't even born when that kicked off. And we've seen that even in Limerick, we have an ongoing feud that's sort of slightly complicated, but you know, it is to do with the Dundon McCarthy gang. And again, people are involved in that feud that weren't even born when it kicked off all those years ago. So it follows through generation to generation, and even a further generation again can pick up where their grandparents began, and it's you know, it's been hugely destructive in Scotland and in Ireland. And it's social media, of course, escalates it all because it gives people, you know, we used to have up in the north, the Republicans would call somebody a rat or do a bit of graffiti, but I mean, it's so much less, and that was regarded as being hugely inflammatory and dangerous. But if you see those videos going up on social media now, just, you know, the sort of disrespect, I suppose, that goes along with that, and how that can really escalate these feuds beyond all measure, you know.
Well, I think we should take a deeper look at all this over the coming weeks and maybe do a couple of profiles of some of the key protagonists involved. I think people are going to be interested in this.
Yeah, I think so.
They always have been. Scottish crime is very strongly linked to Irish crime to the north. We have our brethren in Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester. It's all pretty much the same things going on, just different sort of locations.
It is. I mean, I don't know if you saw the shooting there in Mijas, is that how you pronounce it? A Liverpool man shot dead.
A 30-year-old in a sports club.
In a sports club. So you see again, I mean, this is where the Irish guys, many of them are living. And it just goes on and on, the same faces, some of them sons and some of them older. But yeah, I mean, if you think, I remember Russell Finlay, I think, has been on this podcast a couple of times, and he's spoken to Scottish Parliament. He's a former journalist who's now a member of the Scottish Parliament, and he was saying effectively the Lyons gang should be regarded as an offshoot of the Kinahan cartel, that they were that tightly tied in. It wasn't one of these casual relationships. And of course, the Lyons, members of the Lyons organisation, also appeared involved in the boxing, and you know, they were at every single MTK event that could ever
and
be
they
mentioned.
Expanded very heavily MGM initially into Scotland when they started to expand that empire, that boxing empire. Interestingly, they follow the rules as well, though. You know what I mean? There is spates of violence and gun violence in Spain. They don't really like it because it sort of scares away the tourists. But in Dubai, you ain't allowed, you know, go to murder. And interestingly, sort of from, you know, sources in Scotland would suggest that Stephen Daniels sought refuge and safety in Dubai.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, his arch rivals are also there, including the Kinahan organisation. But obviously you are safe enough if you're there, because nobody's going to just rock the whole
No, because I think you're going to be more worried about the Dubai police than your rival gangsters.
Yeah, but they will not shoot at one another there. They will not kill one another there. They follow that rule, which allows them that, you know, that safety net out there and allows them continue getting a welcome. Spain is slightly different. They don't usually. There is spates of violence. I mean, if you recall as well, in around the 2016 time, there was spates of violence down the Costa. Again, you were probably seeing a void being left, some sort of a vacuum being left as a big organisation like the Irish mafia pull out. You're going to have people trying to move in and muscle in to take their place at the table. But let's follow this and let's try and identify the key protagonists, and maybe we'll do profiles of them.
Sounds good.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel
and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.